Hi, I'm Mary Greendale, and welcome to another edition of Just Thinking. Today we are going to discuss a proposal to install a sewer system in the area downtown that is zoned Village Commercial. This proposal may not appear until the May town meeting, but because it has implications for expanding the tax base in town, I thought we would give it a little extra time for discussion between now and then. To help us understand what the project details are, I've once again asked Travis Ahern, our town administrator, to come on and bring us up to speed. Travis, you're like a walking notebook.
Thank you for having me.
I drag you in for the details, but at any rate, you're masterful at being able to keep on top of all of these things. I don't know how you do it. There's so many projects bouncing around right now.
We do have quite a few things going on. So I was going to put downtown sewerage in a larger context of economic development. We have a few things going on in that area, all of which impact downtown and potentially elsewhere. So there's a few things that have gone on. I'll put them in the context of post-COVID. So we had taken up the state on a program called the Local Rapid Response Planning Program, which provided us technical assistance, which is a consultant. We were assigned Nelson and Nygaard, and they put together an LRRP report, which is on our website. That hit on a couple different areas that I'm just going to touch on, one of which is downtown sewerage. So the LRRP report made a few recommendations, and they look specifically at the Village Commercial District that you mentioned, which runs essentially from the historic downtown, down Central Street, Blair Square, and some areas out. And so that was what they looked at, and their recommendations included branding of Central Street and what we may want to look at, what that may want to look like in the future. Sewer capacity, which I'll talk about, wayfinding for public parking and things as people come into our downtown, especially when they use the rail trail. Blair Square, which has now moved forward through the CPC, and 9 Green Street, which I'll give a brief update on as well, has gone through 3 town meeting votes, which went through design engineering, demolition of that building, which became a safety hazard at one point, and then construction of a parking lot to support our downtown businesses, Goodwill Park, which is right across the street from it, and then also obviously we have parking needs for other government resources like the library in the general area. So all of those things are sort of underway, and one of which is the wastewater treatment plant feasibility study that came out of the LRRP's recommendations. We funded that through the town's ARPA dollars, so that's the American Rescue Plan Act, that provided $4.4 million to the town that can be used over a number of years. We used that to fund a feasibility study to look at our wastewater treatment plant on Linden Street, which has been servicing the Woodland Street complex for over 20 years. That plant, since it's 20 years old, requires investment, and so what we essentially said is, in a relatively smaller scope here, to use that plant, which has capacity, can that plant be used to take capacity from the downtown area, which is geographically a potential? And so that feasibility study has been underway. We engaged through the procurement process Lombardo Associates, which has had history in Holliston before, working on previous iterations of sewer development, which did not come to fruition. And their initial presentation to the select board happened June 6th of 2022, and that initial presentation was really on the facility itself, what it needs to sustain the next 20 years, because it's 20 years old. And that's basically instrumentation, $400,000 there about for upgrades to what is called SCADA, but it's instrumentation of how the plant runs. So we know that. Their next phase is essentially, and at that point, the select board authorized them to do the next phase, which is looking at the capacity of that plant to take on significantly higher flow than it currently does through the school. And that's where they are right now, and so they haven't reported back to the select board yet on that. That will involve, discussions with DEP, that will involve a number of different things, but the idea being, if that plant can be leveraged in town to set up a sewer district that encompasses the downtown area, that will significantly alter the types of businesses that would be able to go in the downtown area. Now, restaurants always come up because they are a heavy user of water and wastewater, but really there are other impacts. It's not just restaurants. And so that study is underway. And is a major component of what we're looking to do with the ARPA funding and economic development. It's a way to potentially jumpstart the downtown area and would significantly change the downtown area in the future. I'm just going to point out one last thing, unless you want me to stop on sewers.
Oh, go ahead.
One last thing that we're also doing through the ARPA funding, the Economic Development Committee in town, which has been established for quite a few years now, additionally wanted to look at where they're focusing their time, the things that they've done in the past, and where they may be able to help the community in the future. And we're looking for technical assistance to do so. And so through ARPA funding, we engaged the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, the MAPC, to engage with them, put together a plan for our economic development for years to come. So that engagement actually kicked off this past Monday on August 22nd, and that engagement runs through March 1st, 2023. So we will have their technical assistance as we go through all of these other things that I mentioned previously, 9 Green Street, the wastewater treatment, and some other economic development opportunities. MAPC is now engaged with the town for the coming year.
Okay, well, we've tried sewers every decade or every 20 years or something like that since time began, so why not now? It's been 20 years since we last tried, so it's probably about time. If we don't put sewers in downtown, is it a big deal that we don't?
You know, it's interesting. I've been approached through actually a member of the EDC put me in touch with a business that was looking to locate in Holliston. They wanted to locate an ice cream shop, which, I think everybody at the time thought that would really be nice on Central Street, in an area between the rail trail and downtown. Wouldn't it be nice to have an ice cream shop? This person was looking for a brick and mortar shop. And the answer was, after working with the Board of Health and a variety of different people, there was not one site, including private real estate companies that are aware of all of the openings in that area, and there was not a site that could cite that because of the wastewater limitations. And so the reality is that we are being impacted by not having these types of services. The other serious concern that I would have if we don't do something that is more of a holistic approach to wastewater in the area, we have a body of water that runs through Chicken Brook. There are concerns whenever you have a dense population with septic systems in an area that it's impacting water quality and things of that nature. So generally speaking, I think Mass DEP and other regulatory bodies would be interested if we could come up with a holistic wastewater approach to our downtown. I think there's real environmental impacts that we could see, as well as the economic development. And there's pros and cons, right? Not everybody wants our downtown to be all restaurants, but I think there's a very real feeling that some people think that it would be nice to have access to more within our town, not having to leave town to access certain things. So you have to balance it, certainly, but I think there's a number of pros, certainly, that would indicate that we should at least be making sure we're doing our due diligence.
Well, I think people should be reassured to the extent that we do have bylaws in place that limit, mass scale development down there. You're not going to get a, huge restaurant or a store down there, and we have some bylaws in place. And I know the Historical Commission has been talking with you and with others in the community, the Planning Board and so forth, about just make sure that the regulations allow us to keep it looking like a downtown and allow the scale to stay what it is, rather than having a huge strip mall running through the center of, down the center of Central Street. So there are ways to protect it.
Right, and that's perfect. And I think that, the other thing that people should understand is this is not, are we voting in October or May?
Yeah.
And sewers magically happen. We have a run-up time here, and we're in a due diligence point. And so all of those things, if we feel like, we need to be updating regulations before we have time to time those two things together, should this be able to move forward?
Well, aren't there also a couple of places where we've had toxic waste dumps, for lack of a better word? The former Gulf's gas station, if I remember correctly, in the past had one. I don't know if there were others, but is there still any? Well, we had the 9 Green Street certainly had its own. I have to assume that some of that stuff is underground still.
Right. So I think, again, from a DEP and regulatory perspective, I think that there would be people who would see the benefit of us. Normally I would look at our wastewater treatment plant and say we want to hook up other users to it, and I would anticipate pushback from DEP. In this, I think that people can see the benefits of why we would want to do that in an area that is densely settled like that. And you're right, so the 9 Green Street site, when the town took it, one of the concerns was the cleanup. The reason that it's a parking lot rather than something more extravagant is that there's a real benefit to making sure that that's kept. It's beneficial to those that abut it, and in addition to the economic development of allowing people to come and park with ease and access buildings, is a good outcome for that site given what the building was on it previously and had done on that site.
Is the water table fairly high downtown? I think it is. I don't remember. I honestly don't remember. But at any rate, I mean, that just is another thing that adds to it, so that you've got a high water table to begin with, and now you're dumping, effluent from all kinds of places. So, all right, well, we're going to do the same thing in our conversation. We're going to stop here, and I'm going to invite us to go forward and talk to the town officials and see what they're thinking, what they're doing, and we'll definitely be having more conversations about this one, I'm sure. But I look forward to that. Okay, thanks again.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next part of this show is all about talking about it with the officials in town. We've heard what Travis had to say in terms of the facts and figures and so forth as concern putting some sort of sewer project downtown. So we're talking about putting in sewers in the village commercial area, which is a very specific zone downtown, piping the effluent to the wastewater facility that is over on Woodland Street, which is apparently underutilized. So why? David. Who's David? Yeah, John Drohan?
My brother's name.
No kidding.
So John Drohan, speaking, I'm a member of the Economic Development Committee, but I'm not speaking on their behalf.
Right.
So as private Holliston citizen, and just understanding the way the situation is, the idea of enabling sewers to go into the downtown commercial area gives the downtown commercial area the ability to expand their businesses, the businesses that they can hold there. In particular, businesses that use water, right? We're not talking about like, gift stores or jewelry stores or things like that, or shoe stores that don't necessarily use a lot of water, but we're talking about things like bakeries or ice cream parlors or restaurants or things like that, where right now it seems that the downtown is limited because we don't have the ability to sewer all of that water.
Everybody's on a septic system or a cesspool or a tight tank right now, and the lots are often very small and probably can't even hold a traditional septic system. So there are limited options. Okay, so what is it, if you're not in that neighborhood, okay, the village commercial, again, a very specific, I don't live there, but I'm still going to have a septic system. And some other people in town might wonder, why are we just doing one area? What's the value of doing one area? John, you want to take a John Cronin? We got 2 Johns. That's why I was calling you David. You see, I was just trying to keep that separate. But anyway.
So I think, in short, the reason why it would make sense to define the area the way it is around the capacity of the treatment plant. The treatment plant was an asset built over 20 years ago to service a school environment. And as you said in the outset, Mary, it's underutilized. If we were to use this town asset to its maximum capacity, we could handle certain sewage effluent for a defined area. So let's define what that area can be. Sensibly, it's the district you just referred to. And it's a little bit more than proof of concept. I was here, like you, 20 plus years ago when the town encountered a town-wide sewer project, which everybody bought into, most everybody. It was voted. But for a lot of reasons, there was some skeptics involved. And one of the things that I remember very vividly was it unfortunately pitted neighbors against neighbors because they weren't in the first phase or they weren't in the priority area and they wanted the sewer sooner. And it didn't really give everybody a community feel. This would give everybody a community feel. This benefits commercial and businesses primarily. And when that happens, we benefit as a community. We will see hopefully increased revenue from new businesses expanding and developing in Holliston. And also, and I'm sure you're going to talk to Robert in a minute, there's the effect of the rail trail and the foot traffic within downtown that will feature ready-made customer base to use this new area. It brings the community together into the core, which was always, I think, one of the features of the rail trail. And our economic development should really feature rejuvenating the center of our town for the benefit of the community. So it's no longer pitting people against each other or neighbors against each other, and it's using an existing asset that we own, that we can improve upon, and will give us at least a foothold, a proof of concept going forward that we can do this if we do it right.
Okay. Well, you said the magic words, and that's the rail trail, because at least in my mind, over the years, I've measured the rail trail or considered the rail trail to be an economic development engine. I mean, that was it. I don't bike, so I didn't need to, go bicycling down there. I do use it to walk. But what I really love about it is all the people that are downtown, and a lot of those people are people who are coming from other places that are just, coming over to do the morning run or whatever. Robert, you've worked very hard, not only on this rail trail, but apparently now you're even jobbing yourself out to other communities to build rail trails because you just don't get enough of it, which is hard to explain. But in the sort of big picture kind of thing, how does a rail trail contribute to the local economy?
It all depends upon how it's being used. And there are a lot of communities that when you look at a regional trail, the longer the trail is, the higher the number of people coming from outside of the area. And so I, for one, when my daughter was living with us, we'd go to different rail trails all throughout the Northeast. Now, my wife and I, we travel all through the Northeast into Canada. And what we look for is when we go to these rail trails is to go to brew pubs and restaurants and see what the local flavor is. And that's what it's all about, to do that. And so the longer the rail trail, the more time people spend in there. Pat and I spent 3 days out in Northampton because there are all these rail trails that are in the East Hampton, Northampton, goes down into Connecticut. And so the economic viability of the downtown can get improved based on how many people are using it from out of town. And so, you get your everyday dog walkers, from the Mudville area. That's a consistent number, but they're not going to be bringing a lot of money into town. It's the people who are coming in from out of town on the weekends and that sort of thing. And so right now, we were lucky enough to get the MAPC to give us a trail counters, and so we get consistently about 300 clicks per year just in the Blair Square area. That doesn't count some of the users.
300 clicks per year means what?
Well, if you divide it by 2, if one person goes past it and goes back, you'd have 150 people, 50,000.
So every click is a person? Okay, and so what are we getting for numbers?
300,000 per year.
300,000,
So
okay.
divide that by 2 if you consider, one person clicks
Okay.
twice, so it's 150,000 people per year. Those numbers are consistent with some of the trail towns in Pennsylvania where they have these regional corridors. And so when you have that many users, that becomes it helps downtown become economically viable. And to further that, there's the plans are to connect the East Coast Greenway, which runs from Florida to Maine, through the Holliston section of the trail. Right now, the plan is to go out through the Worcester area, and that the right-of-way issues are so bad in that area that they're looking to reroute it through Holliston. And so, using the Upper Charles Trail, Holliston, Milford, Sherburne, and up into Framingham. And so the Mass DOT and some of the others, the Rails to Trails Conservancy, are looking at how to make that connection all work. And so they're actively making that happen. And so now you'll get, when you get a regional corridor of a longer length, it's much more viable and it brings more people in. So I think with 150,000 people using it every year, that's good, but you need to get more people come like me who travel around to different rail trails just about every weekend in the summer to frequent and provide economic benefit to our town.
Is the trail that you're talking about going from Florida the one that would be going to Lowell? I think you mentioned it to me at some point. It goes up.
That's a different one.
Okay.
The Upper Charles Trail will connect to the Mass Central Rail Trail. The Mass DOT is also planning to do a major connection that runs from Boston to Northampton. That's 103 miles. And so that goes to the east-west corridor we're coming up from Rhode Island into Milford, then into
Central.
Holliston. That connects up into Framingham, and then the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail goes from downtown Framingham and crosses the Mass Central Rail Trail in Sudbury, or Wayland, I forget which. And so then that is going to be the route of the East Coast Greenway going through those towns.
Framingham's critical, though, and they're really not doing anything, right?
They are, Brooks Freeman Rail Trail is right now their priority. And so, I've been trying to get Framingham on board for 20 years to get them active to try to make that connection from the Upper Charles Trail. The issue was CSX not selling the property. And so, at one point they were ready to sell that piece that goes from downtown Framingham to Sherborne and then connects to us. So it's all, I think it'll happen. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah, you have more patience than I do. So, so there are folks who worry that if we do get sewers downtown and we do start dramatically changing what downtown has for activities and what's there, that we could change and lose the feel, that sort of small town feel. Michelle, do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I think that we have to think of that as a positive. You can keep a small town feel through zoning. We did look at that when I was on the wastewater committee, that you have to do things incrementally. You have to, one of the issues is still parking. Even if you have restaurants, you still have to have parking, so you make sure you don't tear down buildings and build a new Applebee's in the middle of downtown. You keep the existing, if you put in a restaurant, you'd still have to have the existing facade and have parking in the back. So you'd still have the same feel. Mm-hmm. But I did want to add, when John was talking about bringing restaurants in, that we have to remember that right now we don't have a meals tax in Holliston, but if we had restaurants, that's something we can consider, not just the revenue from a business, but an additional source of revenue could be a meals tax. So we haven't considered, because it would be kind of minimal now. Mm-hmm. But if we had, a different sort of businesses in town with restaurants. And I also wanted to add something on to what you were saying, because I was on the wastewater committee, and one of the reasons that the sewers didn't pass originally was because it was a neighborhood thing, because the discharge areas would have been in areas that weren't sewered. But this wouldn't be pitting neighbors against neighbors, because the wastewater treatment facility would be right in the area that was being sewered. So we wouldn't have that same issue.
And it already exists. So
it
it's
already
not like we have
exists.
to-
Right. So I think that one of those issues is negated with a plan like this.
Now, when we talk about trying to keep the look and feel, I want to just toss out just a couple of things. So downtowns usually, buildings come right up to the street. They don't usually have the parking in the front the way that we do like at Village Plaza, where you've got, a big parking lot, and then you get back and then you get to go into Basil's, that kind of thing. And I'm pretty sure our bylaws already account for that. But sometimes if you move a building into the front and you say, well, they can also be as tall as 35 feet or whatever the actual number it is about that, and they're right close to the street, that changes what it looks and feels like too. So are any of those conversations going on, are they going on in the Economic Development Committee at all?
No.
Not at this point?
I mean, we're not talking about that. We're not talking about like the Economic Development Committee, our job is to try and promote business that again is going to fit the town of Holliston, but all in a positive to make Holliston better than what it is now. And one of the things about particularly about this is we kind of put the cart before the horse, or the horse before the cart. I mean, the rail trail's fantastic, right? The rail trail, like you said it. It's like this economic asset that we have, but then you say, well, this is how many people come to the rail trail. People aren't going to come to downtown if the downtown area if there's no business there, or if there's not as much of a draw to go there, and that's just it. And then you kind of say, well, is a restaurant going to if a restaurant could go in there, would they go? Well, maybe they will if there's a market for it. So this is kind of the whole conundrum that we're in, is that we have to be able to figure out, okay, what's our strategic plan to be able to say, okay, we want to build up this downtown and connect it and use the rail trail to be able to generate, to create a bigger, vibrant, more economic place in the downtown. And then and at the same time to be able to have it look and have that our still cozy downtown feel. But again, all of these things have to happen simultaneously, and there's always going to be some give, right? So if this building right here, we may have to make a change on this, and it's not going to look the same. Like the Fisk General Store building may not look the same than it did. And if that's the case, are we going to go to the mat on that and that's going to shut everything down? I don't know.
I think having lived through the really biggest initiative in the 1970s of trying to deal with historic appearance and that kind of stuff, and watching what transpired there, I think the current historical commission is conscious of the fact that, one, whatever's going on inside really isn't relevant. I mean, if you want to just leave the facade and everything looks like this outside and inside it's a bowling alley, it's a whatever, it's an empty space, that isn't the issue. I think most of it comes down to size and scale. And that's what makes downtown feel the way that it feels. And if you look at it at Google Earth, you'll see there's a lot of green space in downtown that you don't even think about when you're down there. So it's little things like that. I think it's less about what's that building look like, and more about that scale and that sense of proportion. And I think people today realize that. But there's also two different things. I mean, the historic district is along Washington Street. That brings one set of questions and so forth. And then Central Street doesn't have that historic nature to it. So it is a whole big Megillah kind of thing. But I want to hear what you folks think about how we approach all of these little pieces.
In my professional days before I retired, I was working doing permitting and projects for a civil engineering firm, and a couple of those were in the downtown Arlington, and this was back in the late 90s and early 2000, and they have a very strong design review committee, and so I spent a lot of time, a lot of night meetings with architects, and they were grilling the architects on the color of the facade and all that, and I think one of the things that can happen is to have not only the zoning requirements, but also a design review committee to make sure that what is being built is appropriate for the downtown area, and it fits in with the current architecture and that sort of thing. And architecture is not my focus, but I see that as a way to achieve the goal of making more development more dense and make it appropriate for the town.
More dense, define that.
I think, especially if you have a sewer provisions, I think, to have more restaurants, bars, pubs, brew pubs, ice cream places, and even have, maybe some senior housing and more dense housing in the downtown area would be a good thing. To make it more pedestrian friendly, make it more bicycle friendly, and the studies have shown that if you introduce bicycles and pedestrians, they spend more money in the town than if you had cars only passing through.
Sure, makes sense.
So I think that's, to have it more dense and have it more viable.
Especially if you don't have parking spaces. They tend to just go right through. But anyway, does the select board have any kind of strategic plan in place for what they'd like to do, like to see, encourage economic development,
So there's a few layers to that answer. First, the Economic Development Committee is an important part of referral of what type of industry, what kind of plans, what kind of changes can the town make, and we take guidance from them. We feature a lot of energy in their direction to help us understand what's best for our community right now. So that's in play. John's people are, they're going to do great stuff. With respect to our board, I'd say over the last few years there've been 3 levels to that. The first is we recognized early on, I believe, as a group, that once we've paid off all of our infrastructure that we've just completed, I think 20 years of capital notes for, that was started 20 years ago, we now have an opportunity to take a breath and look at our investment in an infrastructure. And we've been talking a lot about sidewalks, about water pipe replacement, water treatment plant, things of that nature. Those are critical infrastructure things that need to get done. They cost a lot of money, and we're pushing an agenda that shows the investment to take care of our infrastructure so that for the next 50 to 100 years, Holliston's going to be in great shape for it to do what it can achieve, what it sets its mind to. The next level is, over the last several years, and I think I have to give the host some credit here, a group is formed called Envisioning Future Holliston. And this is kind of a wide net. A survey was done. I believe our chairman, Ben Sparrow, has been helpful collecting information from over 1,000 responses. That's a pretty good sample of people who live in this town, who have something to say about what they want, what they'd like to see, what's working, what's not working. That data will be presented at town meeting in October, and it will be useful going forward. But like anything, Mary, it's a snapshot, right? It's telling you what today's residents want to see. They're not the same, it's not the same snapshot that we saw 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. But we generally have an idea that people want, as Michelle indicated, some sustainable identity. What we are today, we'd like to be in 50 years, but we want to be better. We want to be more sophisticated. We would like to be able to say we've got a more balanced tax base that could come in the form of local and economic development. And that's what I think we're here to talk about. The third part of it is really something that I think is overlooked here. The town's received over $4 million in American Rescue Plan Act funding, and we've invested a lot of that money into different areas of town government over the last year or so. School's got a big chunk, and we're putting some money into some nonprofits and some businesses in town that need relief. There's a big piece of it that's still waiting, and we intend to use that money to help fund this Seward economic development area on Woodland, believing that it's seed money. It's going to hopefully produce an improvement to what we see, but not a change in the character that we all desire. So I support what Michelle is saying too. You have to be smart about it, zone it properly. We want to make sure that whatever comes next is better. And that's the simple solution I think that we're all trying to achieve through increased pedestrian access, use of federal funds, and listening to people and what they desire through good, solid surveys.
Right now, Holliston's tax base is approximately 12 to 14% business, okay? Now, you can do wild guess, but what do you suppose the maximum would be? What's the maximum we could ever really expect, percentage-wise, that we could ever reach?
20.
25 tops.
I would say it depends upon whether you have sewer or not. You know, if it's just the downtown sewer, I think you're probably limited to the 15 to 20. If you can sewer more of it, I think you'd have a higher tax base because you get a higher use in some of the industrial parks that are there now.
I think it's going to depend more on industrial parks than downtown, to be honest.
I think it is too, and there are only 2 big parcels left that are industrially zoned to be developed. And I have done this question with all of the assessors and including the professional staff, current and past staff, and I guessed maximum 20 and was laughed out of the room, okay? 15 to 18 is the best guess, okay? And that's even understanding that as it stands right now, we don't have a process whereby we go into the industrial park and we go to the owner and we try to recruit businesses for that owner. We don't bring in, you know, an aggressive kind of recruitment. That's not been our model, which is what other cities and towns have been doing for 30 years. So assuming we just lie in wait and so forth and so on, chances are that, you know, even my best guess at 20% is probably optimistic. So I choose to be very cautious when I make comments about shifting and burdens and that kind of stuff, because realistically, the burden is always going to be on the residential property in this town. And people need, and we're almost out of that land too.
It's not a model that's unusual in the area, though.
Not at all.
Many communities are up against the
Absolutely.
same limits. And
Unless you have 50% of your town is in business, commercial, and that kind of stuff, you don't even start looking at split rates. So, you know, we're a long way from ever being able to do what, you know, some cities and are able. John?
Well, you mentioned sewer rates. One item in this model of putting a sewer pipe in downtown, going back to that original sewer project from 20 years ago, the idea, the concept was, and our board hasn't voted or discussed this, so that this is just my opinion, is that how are we going to pay for that? So we've talked about potential federal money being used to install or contribute towards the design and installation. But effectively, the users of the pipe pay for it, pay for the hookup, and pay for the maintenance of that system. So I would not expect any considerable impact on the rest of the town taxpayers for this type of improvement. It would almost be self-contained.
Yeah, I understand that. I think it's actually a model that could be used with the industrial park, where you build a treatment facility. The town does it up front as a treatment facility. I think Jeff Zeamer and I had a conversation like this probably 10 years ago. But at any rate, that the town does the setup, and then it's the ratepayers that pay it back. You know, it is a way to recruit business. You know, you're probably more likely to be there if you've got a way to deal with the management.
One of the
sewage.
ideal discharge areas, though, is now a solar farm in an industrial park, so.
Does that preclude it? Why would it?
I wouldn't think so, because you could do solar farms on top of
Yeah.
landfills and that sort of thing, so I think you could
Yeah, I
have
don't
it.
think that does preclude it. In fact, I would argue that that sort of maximizes land use.
Well, if you have the discharge area, I mean, if you have the area for a treatment facility close by, I guess,
Yeah,
yeah, you can pipe it, yeah.
yeah, no, I mean, to me, that's kind of like out in western Massachusetts, they have pasture underneath those solar panels. You know, they have them high enough so that the cows can gather underneath them.
Cows are in the shade.
The cows get the shade. Anyway, it all works. Okay. Does the Economic Development Committee have any money to be able to hire somebody to, you know, actually coordinate things and actually recruit and work with businesses? I mean, I assume all of you are like the rest, you know, volunteers who really have workaday jobs.
Right. Right now, for that kind of money, I don't know how much that costs. We have some money, but we haven't said earmarked, okay, this, or even gone and asked the town to say, you know, this would be a good idea. It's not a bad idea at all, really, because that's kind of part of the Economic Development Committee's, that's our charge, right? Like you said, to go out, if we had the capability, if we had the means, the time to be able to go out and recruit businesses, particularly into the industrial area, and also to be able to, you know, to optimize the, you know, the areas like the downtown area, or the other part of Holliston, where it's like, you know, where there's actually the commercial areas. Yeah, if we had money to be able to do that, and a plan. These are the things that we've discussed, and I know it's been discussed in the Economic Development Committee in the past. You know, and it's almost like now we're in this place where it's, you know, like we have the federal funds, we have the state funds that are here, and, you know, we're in this position where it's like, now it's time for us to do something. You know, it's time for us to kind of make some decisions and stop talking about it and start making some things happen, because, you know, I feel like, and again, I'm speaking just on my own personal opinion, but, you know, the town's not going to, you know, we talk about like the downtown area. If, you know, it's not going to thrive, it's not going to grow, and you can only have so many, you know, there's only so much business, only so much market for a gift shop or for a shoe store or something like that. And then after a while, that, you know, people say, well, I love, you know, on the one hand, everybody loves, you know, like
it looks cute.
Everybody loves the downtown. Oh, I love downtown. You know, if you ask 100 people in Holliston, they'll say, you know, 100 out of 100 will say, I love Holliston, I love the downtown area. But then it says, well, yeah, but one of the things is like, well, I can't go down there anymore because there's nothing for me to go down there for. So,
Right. What about East Holliston? Is there anything in here that's... Wow. Pulled that one out of the air.
but what about it?
Well,
had
the
a
commercial area in
conversation-
East Holliston, I mean, it very often the people who run the businesses in East Holliston do the, what about us? You know?
We, if I could speak up on that briefly and very briefly, our board put in place some commercial vehicle exclusions in the last several years to kind of bring those heavy motor vehicles off of the side streets in communities, side streets right onto Route 16 where they belong. When we were tackling that project, the former state rep Carolyn Dyker and I and Travis had a conversation about looking at the main entrance to the East Holliston Industrial Park at Lowland, right across from Creative Playthings is the main entrance. I think that's the Whitney Street entrance, if I'm not mistaken. And trying to direct the traffic onto 16 East and West, it would likely need a light. It would need some kind of signalization to promote and permit safe passage of vehicles both ways. That's the kind of thing that would require state involvement because there's a stretch of roadway that the state owns as well. So that's a long-term project. I can envision maybe in the next 10 years tackling that because I do think if we're able to successfully allow those commercial vehicles in and out of that industrial zone safely and effectively, it benefits the residents most of all, but it also helps the business owners understand how to transit, how to move their wares in and out. One of the things about East Holliston that's always been a struggle, though, is that stretch of land or roadway on Washington as you're coming from Racine Corner toward Sherburne. It's a blind stretch. It has right near, is it still Covanta? I always forget the name.
Yeah,
right near the way station. It's like a runway, and that whole roadway would probably have to have some kind of improvement to benefit the heavy vehicles, which is where they belong. But I think the infrastructure has to be something you think about first, Mary.
Do we have a sewer pipe
Yes,
in East Holliston?
we do. If I'm not mistaken, I might be out of school here, I think that was a $500,000 piece of pipe that
what I
went
remember.
right to the bottom of Racine Corner. It's one of the major assets that we got out of the sewer project back 20 years ago.
Where does it
Yeah.
go? From where to where?
It goes nowhere.
It goes,
It was intended to be a connection, right?
We called it the pipes to nowhere.
Okay. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Economic Development Committee, you got a pipe to nowhere.
But it's all doable, right? I mean, like you said, it's a when you say a 10-year plan, I mean, look at the rail trail. I mean, look at how long that. I mean, that was a long strategic plan, and
You should see the pictures of him.
And
when he
here we
started.
are, right? But that's the poster child for this. Like this isn't going
Absolutely.
to happen overnight, and nor should it happen overnight. Nor should it happen overnight from a cost
Yep.
perspective.
Agreed. Absolutely agree. Yeah. No, he was a mere boy when he started, and now he's retired.
But that's it. I think that's the kind of vision that as a I mean, I say as the committee, but as the town. The town needs to say this is what we want to do,
Yeah.
and it's going to take some time, and it's going to take some, and of course nothing's going to be smooth. Nothing's going to go exactly planned. But if we have that vision, that goal, the collective goal that this is what we want to see, then it can be done. The
I
rail
just want
trails,
to
for example.
toss an idea in there then that says instead of having that strip mall look of East Holliston, let's think about ways we can make it look like a village center kind of thing. Bring the parking out, eliminate the parking, put the buildings toward the front, put the parking in the rear. Start looking at those kinds of things if the opportunities arise, because it's another viable commercial center. It really is. It's a village all by itself. It's on a map. It's on the map, unlike some other places in town. It's on the map.
I know we're here to talk about economic development and not housing, but maybe in the next segment. There's a reach here, Mary, that gets you from economic development into affordable housing.
Yep.
And I know you're very familiar with that space, but if you're talking about the development of any residential commercial area, the movement now is to go towards more of that mixed use that promotes the village living, for commercial as well as affordable housing. I know that's something you've talked to me about many times in the past, and it's another chapter in this story about how we can be better.
75 Exchange Street. Okay, 75 Exchange Street. That's all I need to say. Perfect for, it's the old mill building that John Gagnon owns that's just before the underpass, overpass, whatever you call it. Rail trail right there. 92 windows around it, great spot for downstairs for something, a restaurant with a straight shot to that down that, and then upstairs for housing. And I'm going to bid on that unit. I'm hoping that through this process, because I can say as someone who really wants to get to live downtown before I die, I'd really welcome having places where you could rent a little apartment and be able to walk around town when you've had to give up your license because your eyes went to, the way of whatever. So, give up your license, but you can still walk. You can still see people. You can go to the library. You can go, whatever.
Walk to Super Ed.
Walk to Super Ed, grab your milk or whatever. So we have to be thinking that way, and I think we've missed the boat on that.
One other thing is on transportation. I've had a number of people contact me who were looking to move into town, and they ended up not moving into town because we had no connection to the train station. And so
Yeah.
if you build
That's
a
the
denser
biggie.
development along the railroad corridor, now you can get people downtown to downtown
That's a
Framingham.
huge one. That's a huge one. I would have just so loved to be on the, on a way to get to the Framingham train quickly. That would have been ideal. I lived right over there. It could have happened, but it didn't. But yeah, you're going to have to work harder on Framingham. Okay. Okay. Before we wrap up, anybody got anything else that they want to throw in here?
I just want to say, it's all related.
It is.
It's all related.
There's nothing in government, in town government, that isn't related. That actually is one of the things that makes me so frustrated when I observe the silos of government, where people don't even know who's on the other boards. They don't have, the folks that are on the most conspicuous committees do. But the farther away you get from those committees, the less people know one another. And to me, that's where we lose as a result.
Yeah, that interconnection, it's
Because it's all the
important.
same thing. It's quality of life in a community, and it all feeds into it. But anyway, last thoughts?
One thought, I guess, is you say the longevity of having to stick with a project for such a long period of time. What happens is that we have select board, and they tend to change over time, and so there's their goals and their objectives of being on the select board
By the way, it's
change.
a good thing, right?
It's a good thing, but you lose that continuity, and
You
so
lose continuity.
10-year
Yeah.
project in East Holliston.
right, exactly, and so the benefit we have for the rail trail is that we have members who were on there since it was established in 1999. They're still there.
You're right. You're
And
right.
so you need to have some sort of continuity, and I think that needs to be probably at town hall.
I think that is, to me anyway, it is the staff people, because boards have to rotate, they have to revolve. People burn out, and if they don't burn out, I think my ex used to have a thing, they either mellow or rot. So, you just got to keep shifting them around. But
in this case, I would think you'd almost need an economic development staff person who would take that goal and
I would
run
love to
with
see
it.
that myself, but, I stand alone on that idea probably. But we tried that when we hired the planner. Some part of that planner's time was supposed to be economic development. That just never worked out.
Yeah, that's a planning job
it's too-
is stuck with the jurisdictional aspects
Subdivision
of a planning
control.
board. Yeah.
So, thank you, folks. Yeah, John.
Just real quick
Yeah.
on that point about, Michelle's right, everything's connected. These are community decisions. We're here as community representatives in our own way to pitch what we think, what we see, what we understand, what we've learned. But going forward, we got a town meeting coming up, and I'd encourage people to bring their bodies to town meeting and be heard. These are the decisions that impact your tax dollars in some case, or your quality of life. A lot of similar kinds of conversations about economic development will be coming up in the next 6 to 18 months or so. Get involved. That we've
I
always
agree.
encouraged people to step out from your comfort zone, get involved with a board, a committee like John has, and Robert, myself, and Michelle, and be part of the solution. I think that's really, really important. It's a takeaway that people who watch this show need to know. If you are going to sit at home and not vote, you might as well be invisible. These are important decisions, so get out there and be heard.
I agree.
Yeah, and it's, as I always say, I might be on the finance committee, John's on the select board, but it's town meeting that appropriates money. So everyone who's a registered voter that shows up at town meeting, they're the ones that appropriate the money.
Yep.
So,
And then the other issue is that running for office, but that's a whole nother show. That just there are too many times in which people are either not having contested races, or we have open seats that just go to whomever. Anyway, folks, thanks so much. I appreciate your time. John, Robert, John.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for stepping in. Okay, Michelle, I appreciate that. It's good that we didn't end up with an empty seat. All right. Okay, with that, we thank you very much, and we will get you next time. Thanks.